Moving on to Dr. Jan Rosenau from the Regulatory Assistance Project, who is going to be making the first pitch today in our heating and hydrogen theme on decarbonising heat. So Dr. Rosenau, welcome to the committee.
Thank you. Good morning.
I'm pressing reset on my clock and you have 5 minutes from now.
My pitch to you is about heating. Heating is amongst the toughest challenges facing climate policy in the UK. And why is heating so important? 20% of the UK's carbon emissions are from heating our buildings. That's mostly our homes. And this is more than all of the emissions of all petrol and diesel cars put together. And almost all of the heat that we currently use in buildings is from fossil fuels, mainly natural gas. And less than 5% of all heat being used is from low carbon sources in homes. And to meet the government's net zero targets for 2050, we will need to decarbonize all homes and buildings fully by 2050. This means we will need to do two things. First, we need to increase energy efficiency of our buildings. And second, we need to replace all of our fossil heating systems with low carbon heating. It was really great to see the Chancellor announcing last week that £3 billion will be spent on energy efficiency upgrades. That is a step in the right direction, but it cannot be a one-off investment. And progress in the past has been disappointingly slow, particularly over the last decade. The market for energy efficiency retrofits has collapsed after the failure of the Green Deal to deliver. And as a result, current retrofit rates are completely inadequate for achieving even a significant portion of the required level of decarbonisation to meet the 2050 targets. And almost all of UK's homes will require upgrading by 2050. That is almost 20,000 homes per week. We currently manage to do a small fraction of this only. About 3,700 homes are improved every week with significant energy efficiency measures that are supported by government programmes. The replacement of fossil fuel-based heating systems is happening at an even slower pace. In 2018, only 27,000 heat pumps were installed across the UK. That's a fraction of the 1.7 million gas boilers we installed in the same year. And at the current rate, it would take more than 700 years to reach the 19 million heat pumps the Committee on Climate Change suggests are needed to reach the net zero goals. This means there's a clear case for urgent government intervention. And the existing policy framework is clearly not fit for purpose and has failed to deliver against expectations. As far as I'm aware, there has never ever been an inquiry into this topic by this committee or any other committee, and it is critical that the government is held to account on this issue. Such an inquiry would be particularly timely. The government has announced a heat strategy for later this year. This will determine the way forward regarding heat in the UK. Last week, the Secretary of State confirmed that the heat strategy is still on track for delivering in the autumn. And the committee should scrutinise the plans in detail to ensure that Parliament is involved in the discussion about the way forward. Let me end on a positive note, as I'm aware that a lot of this sounds rather gloomy. Decarbonising heating is not a problem for which we do not have technological or policy solutions. And let me tell you briefly about my own story before I conclude. That's me and my family, have reduced emissions from heating in our own home that was built in 1880 by almost 3/4. And our heating bills are now 60% lower than they used to be. This can be replicated across the UK. And many other countries, for example, Sweden, have gone much further and faster and managed to radically reduce emissions from heating. But it requires bold policy ambition to make this happen. The UK can do it, and I believe the committee ought to hold the government to account on its forthcoming heating strategy and launch its first ever inquiry into this topic. If we get this right, this could create tens of thousands of new jobs, especially in parts of the country that urgently need them when recovering from COVID-19. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you for your pitch with a minute to go, which will give us some time for some extra questions. I'm going to Mark Palsy first, please.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Dr. Rosenau. Dr. Rosenau, you told us that attempts had been made to deal with this very serious problem on a number of occasions that hadn't succeeded. So, do you think the inquiry or the work that the committee should do should look backwards as well as looking forwards, or should we ignore what has happened in the past?
I think it's both. I think there's a lot to be learned from past policy success and failure, both. I think the Green Deal offers some important learnings, but also the obligations on energy companies to install energy efficiency measures and the renewable heat incentive, which is coming to an end next year. All of these are interesting learning opportunities. I think looking forward, I completely agree with that, and we can learn a lot from other places that have done this. We won't just be able to translate that into concrete policies directly, but we can certainly learn from what has worked elsewhere. And I think the committee would be in a good place to ask some of those questions, both on past experience and on future.
And can you tell us which countries have successfully decarbonised the heating of their buildings, and who might we look at first in an inquiry?
The most successful countries in Europe that have done this are the Scandinavian countries. So Sweden, I mentioned already. Finland is a good example as well. Norway and Denmark. They are the most successful in terms of the speed and the scale of decarbonisation. But you may also want to look a bit further and look at places such as California, which are currently at full speed ahead to transition away from fossil fuels for heating.
And you also spoke about the need to link decarbonisation of heat with energy efficiency, improving the energy efficiency of our buildings. Which of the two activities would you say was the more important?
We need both. We can't just do a decarbonisation with simply installing new heating systems, or just do energy efficiency and not install new heating systems.
And what are the challenges in the UK of that? I think in your what you've written to us about, you've told us about the silo effect that occurs within UK government departments. How might we come forward with some proposals that would deal with that?
That's exactly right. In the past, we had dedicated energy efficiency policies and renewable heat policies, and they haven't always been fully in sync. So I think an integrated policy approach is what is needed. And that means having a strategy, which the government is actually working on, but it needs to be scrutinized and it needs to be ambitious enough to deliver on the targets.
And would we be able to do some work that would input into the government's thinking, or is it your view that government have decided on a course of action and that's that?
I think there's still scope to put into government's thinking at this point. I think it's important that as many people as possible are involved in those discussions to really get those learnings from past failures and successes into the thinking of the government.
Okay, and what would be the prize? What would, if we get this right, what does the UK achieve?
Well, I think we create lots of jobs, especially in areas of the country that urgently need them. We will have less air pollution in cities, which is a great benefit, and more comfort. People will live in more comfortable buildings, healthier buildings, and simply more pleasant to live in. And I think that is a key benefit that is often overlooked. It's not all about carbon. This is really about an infrastructure program for the UK to upgrade the building stock, which is amongst the leakiest in the whole of Europe.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Dr. Rose. Now, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mark. Any additional questions from colleagues? Alan Brown, please.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Dr. Jan, for that. How important, if we look at this, how important is it we look at the overall cost of the decarbonisation in terms of both, the change of heating system and the energy efficiency? You mentioned learning lessons from Green Deal, so I presume we would need to look at that as part of how it gets funded going forward and what a system of grants would look like, because again, I'm aware there's a lot of people that are fuel pure, and it's making sure we tackle them. If I can just ask one more question in terms of heat decarbonisation. The committee has received submissions from some fuel suppliers that are advocating a step change policy for those that are off the gas grid. So, for example, they might be using the oil heating systems at the moment, and they're advocating we still use a step change by doing a carbon-based fuel that's got lower emissions, and then work towards full decarbonisation of these off-gas grid properties. And is that a serious policy consideration that we could maybe look at as well, or should we just go straight for net zero?
I think the off-gas properties you mentioned are particularly interesting because they often offer the best cost-benefit ratio, for installing an alternative heating system, because heating oil is very expensive to run your heating system on. So that could be one of the early segments where we really roll out new heating systems and upgrade buildings, make them more energy efficient. Your first question on what kind of policy we would need, that deserves, I think, a lengthy inquiry by the committee. We certainly need to make sure that it's not just a program for the able to pay. It needs to be benefiting everybody, especially the fuel poor, so we're not leaving them behind on more expensive and more carbon-intensive fuels.
One final quick question and quick answer on this session from Paul Howell, please.
Thank you, Chair. Really, I think Alan's covered a number of the points that I was coming to anyway, but it was really, another one would be, is this about evolution or revolution, in terms of, or is it, almost like geographic spreads where you can do one town one way and somewhere else another way? I mean, I'm aware of certainly the town in one of the Nordic countries where it's completely dealt with on like thermal heat from underground and things. What are you advocating in terms of that, or is it just how do you put the whole picture together?
So what you mentioned is, I think, what it has been called an area-based approach to this topic, and I think that's right. Especially when you think of technologies such as district heat. I think there was a piece just in the media this morning about using waste heat for heating our homes, for district heating, that you may have seen. And clearly, we can't leave that to individual households to make that decision. That requires another actor, the local authority and the government, to step in and make those decisions in collaboration with households, but certainly not leave them to make the decisions by themselves.
Thank you for your pitch and your time.